Greetings and welcome to the United States Transhumanist Party Virtual Enlightenment Salon. My name is Gennady Stolyaroff II, and I am the chairman of the U.S. Transhumanist Party. Here we hold conversations with some of the world's leading thinkers in longevity, science, technology, philosophy, and politics. Like the philosophers of the Age of Enlightenment, we aim to connect every field of human endeavor and arrive at new insights to achieve longer lives, greater rationality, and the progress of our civilization. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's U.S. Transhumanist Party Virtual Enlightenment Salon of November 14th, 2021. I am delighted to have a panel of U.S. Transhumanist Party officers and guests. We have our Director of Visual Art, Art Ramon Garcia. We have our Legislative Director, Jason Geringer, and we have numerous guests joining us today from FairVote Washington. We have Kit Muehlman, we have Lisa Ayrault, we have Chris, and we have Stoney Bird as well. And we have our Northern California liaison, Celeste Castaldo, joining us. So we have a full panel today. We're excited to find out about the efforts of FairVote Washington to introduce ranked choice voting in Washington state. This is, of course, a practice that we in the U.S. Transhumanist Party have engaged in for the past 5 years, and we found it to work remarkably well. And we are interested to hear from FairVote Washington about their experience with it, as well as their experience advocating it, because ultimately this is a practice that we want to spread to both local and state level and ultimately national elections in the U.S. So welcome. Kit, please start us out by introducing FairVote Washington and what you do.
Well, hi. Thank you, Gennady. I'm Kit Muehlman. I'm from Bellingham, Washington, and I'm a volunteer with FairVote Washington. That's a nonprofit, nonpartisan group that works for election reforms such as ranked choice voting. As we feel like this simple change to the way we vote can be the key that opens so many more reforms in democracy that are very needed right now. So I'll tell my story briefly. I was never very political until after the election of 2016. Politics was just so ugly and toxic that it was keeping me awake at night. And then I remembered my brother telling me about ranked choice voting, and I understood how that could make politics different. That could make the incentives in politics different and change so many things. And at that point, I started working for a ranked choice voting, and I've been working with it ever since, and it helps me sleep. So with me today is the Director of FairVote Washington, Lisa Ayrault. If you'll just say hello, and
sorry.
There you go.
Excuse me, unmuting myself. Good. Hello, everybody. My name's Lisa Ayrault. Came to this work from a long-time career teaching mathematics, middle school and high school, and also served overseas in Africa as a Peace Corps volunteer where I lived under a military dictatorship, and really came home with an appreciation for our democracy and the need to nurture it. It was through my 7th grade math students that I learned about different voting methods, and particularly ranked choice voting, and am now working full-time to bring ranked choice voting here to Washington state.
So also with us is Chris Mason. He's here to help answer questions in a bit. Chris knows technical things I could never dream of understanding. So Chris, would you say hi?
Yeah, sure. So that's Stoney on the screen, but hi. Yeah, I'm one of the other volunteers, and I do technology stuff for FairVote Washington. But yeah, I'll be here for Q&A, and looking forward to it.
So, and my co-presenter for this first part is Stoney Bird.
Hi, I'm Stoney Bird. I also live in Bellingham, For many years, I worked as a corporate lawyer, but I haven't been doing that since 1990. I first got involved with ranked choice voting in 2015. The Whatcom County, where I live, has a county charter, and there's every 10 years there's a formal review of the provisions of the charter. In 2015, the big issue facing the Charter Review Commission was how to elect the county council. And I went and talked to them about ranked choice voting almost every meeting, and they almost put it on the ballot, came within one vote. And then as soon as FairVote Washington came into existence a couple of years after that, I started working with them as a volunteer, and I've been doing that ever since.
All right, excellent. Thank you very much for these introductions. We are pleased to have all four of you as our guests today. And Kit, I understand you have a presentation to share with us on ranked choice voting.
I do, and let's see how this goes. It's always a surprise. So, let's see. Clicking through things here.
Yes. And while Kit is preparing her presentation, I would like to note that the U.S. Transhumanist Party uses ranked choice voting in its internal ballots. We have had now over 16 votes on our platform, our constitution, endorsements of particular candidates that used this method. And we think it works quite well in allowing reasonable outcomes to prevail without people engaging in this practice of strategic voting, which plagues plurality voting systems and leads to the two-party trap that a lot of people experience in the United States. So with that, Kit, please proceed.
Thanks, Gennady. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Awesome. That's awesome. So good. Okay. So welcome, everybody. Welcome on the panel. Welcome people who are listening on streaming, and welcome to the people who are watching this as a recording. So Stoney will tell us what we're going to do today. If I can get this to move the slide. Well, here we go. There we go. Stoney, what are we going to do today?
Can you move one more? There we go. So we're going to have a couple of demos, one about single winner ranked choice voting. That's the first item. And then the third item is what we call proportional ranked choice voting, sometimes called proportional representation. We'll also talk about where ranked choice voting is used, and we'll talk about the proposed legislation nationally and in Washington state. And then I have a few supplemental slides that get into these matters in more detail.
Okay, this is being sticky. Something is very sticky here.
Yes, there's just a momentary delay when you advance the slides, but they do eventually get advanced.
Great. Okay. Well, I think one of the best ways to introduce ranked choice voting is just to do it. So we're going to start with a dessert election. I'm going to have to, and can someone put the dessert election in the chat somehow? I can stop sharing and do it.
I just
think
thank you, Lisa.
I think I got it in the right chat, folks.
Okay.
There it is.
So there's a link that has an app, Ranked Vote, Autumn Pies. And if all our participants will click that link, you'll get a ballot. And say somebody has offered to bake us a pie, and we're going to have to agree on which pie most of us want. So if you would drag your favorite pie to the top, and the next pie after that, and so on. And let me see. I'm going to go look at see if if any results are coming in. Well,
Yes.
not
So
yet. Not yet.
everybody who is watching, whether on YouTube or on Facebook, I have highlighted the link here. You can either type the link directly into your browser, or if you are looking on YouTube, see the YouTube chat where the link is interactive.
So yes, and it's helpful to have some votes in there so we can use it as a demonstration.
Yes, and it does look like in the preliminary results, votes are accruing, so people are accessing the poll successfully.
I voted.
You voted? Great. I'm going to see if. Oh yes, here I had to refresh it to get all the votes in. That's awesome. Okay, so we've got 21 votes in here. I'm going to refresh again and see if we got any more. 23. They're still coming in. That's great.
Wow, that was the fastest we ever got results.
Yes, well, it's an interesting platform that you use. Actually, this is something we're going to want to discuss because we have been using Google Forms and Google Sheets to tabulate the results of our ranked preference votes, and that can be a labor-intensive process.
Yes, I can imagine it is. There are we'll talk about all the free online options, yeah, when we're finished. So here we have the first round. We've had 24 votes come in, and in order for a candidate to win, they're going to need to cross this dotted line of 13 votes. And at this point, no candidate has that many votes.
So Kit, Lisa here, we don't see the screen with the results yet.
Oh, you don't? Oh, thank you. Oh, interesting.
So I am going to
Okay, let me go
also
back to
highlight the
there.
link to see the results of the poll. If you,
Well,
again, click on this link, if you're in the audience, you should be able to see it. But Kit, I think you're going to need to share your screen again and share the page with the results.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. I saw it. I thought you saw it. Here we go.
I did because I had it open separately.
But
The results are even animated. That's pretty cool.
yeah. Okay. So here we are. Now, do you see results on the screen? Am I sharing?
Yes.
Great. And you can still hear me?
Yes.
Great. Okay. So we have here 24 votes, and we need 13 votes to win from these four candidates. Now, apple pie and pumpkin pie have 7 each. They're ahead, but they're not more than half. So more than half of 24 votes would be 13. If we were doing this in person, we could go stand in a group with other people who had the same first choice. We'd be standing in different lines, eating our pies. We've gone all out here. We brought you 4 pies to choose from. And we're just going to have to imagine that we're standing in line with our friends. Okay, so in a ranked choice election, instead of just looking at the first round, first choices, we carry this a little farther. We take people's second choices into account. So we look at the chart here, and lemon meringue pie has 4 votes. They came in last. So lemon meringue doesn't really have any chance to win. But the voters who chose lemon meringue for their first choice, they still have a say in the final count. So we're going to eliminate lemon meringue as a candidate. And those 4 voters are now, they can imagine walking to the line of their next choice. And everyone else stays right where they are with their first choice. So I'm going to click this next button and go to round 2. And some of the lemon meringue pie, 3 lemon meringue first choices went to apple pie as their second, and 1 went to pumpkin pie as their second. We still don't have, apple pie's ahead, but we still don't have more than half. So we're going to go to another round. Pecan pie will be eliminated this time, and those 6 voters will go to their next choice. And we have a winner. We have apple pie with 14 votes, which was even one more vote than they needed. So we know now that even though apple pie and pumpkin pie started off tied, when we take people's second choices into account, apple pie is clearly the winner. So I'm going to stop sharing this and get back to here. And if people have any questions.
Yes. So we do have a comment here from Daniel Twett. He sees an analogy here to in-person political candidate caucusing, where candidates who receive the lowest numbers of votes get eliminated in a particular round, and then people redistribute their support to other candidates. So that's an interesting comparison that he draws.
Daniel, that's exactly right. That's exactly the way it works. And the benefit of ranked choice voting over that, although that sounds like a lot of fun too, but the benefit of ranked choice voting, the way we did it is we have a ballot, and a ballot can go right into the election software, hardware, and we'll have a winner right away. Yeah. Okay, thank you for that. Now I'm going to see if sharing will work here again. Are we back to pies?
Not yet, but hopefully we will soon be. And I will add that in terms of the efficiency of it, having software like you demonstrated that allows for the instant runoffs to be instantly performed is quite helpful. Now, let's see. Kit, I see your pies, so
Yes.
let us proceed with that.
Great, thanks. So Stoney, why change the way we vote?
Well, we've mentioned some of the problems that ranked choice voting solves. Another one is that you can conduct the election without having to have a primary. All the candidates are lined up, and that has several benefits. One is savings of cost for the taxpayers and for the candidates, and it also saves time. People don't have to get geared up to participate in the primary and then a couple of months later in the general election. And one of the facts about primaries is that the turnout, the number of people who actually vote in the primaries, is usually very low. It's often in Washington state, it's in the 20% range. And yet those are the people, only 20% of the voters are deciding who all the rest of us can vote on. If you get rid of the primary, then the larger turnout that happens in the general elections are the ones who decide who's going to represent us. We've already mentioned the fact that with ranked choice voting, you can avoid the spoiler effect, the vote splitting effect. So candidates, voters can vote for the candidate that they really do like the best without fear that it's going to throw the election to someone they can't stand. And candidates don't have to worry about the spoiler effect. They or splitting the vote if they run. So more candidates are likely to be encouraged to run. And we'll get into this benefit a bit more when we talk about proportional RCV, but the threshold for election in a proportional RCV election is lower, and therefore the burden of campaigning and the number of voters you need to attract is lower, and you're more likely to win, even if you're not one of a candidate supported by one of the major parties. This is an important one. The candidates need to speak in a way that attracts voters who aren't necessarily their core voters. And another benefit of it, which is just about to appear on the screen, is you don't find ranked choice voting candidates bashing their opponents. They do some, but not as much. In a winner-take-all election, it's all or nothing, and there's a great incentive to bash your opponents, but with ranked choice voting, that's not true. So there are all sorts of problems that ranked choice voting solves.
So
So back to you, Kit.
Thanks, Stoney. Do you hear me?
I do.
Great. So where in the United States is ranked choice voting used? So 26 states use ranked choice voting in a wide range of ways. The teal states, Alaska and Maine, use ranked choice voting statewide for federal and presidential elections. And the yellow states in presidential primaries, the purple states, and a lot of local elections. Almost 50 cities in the United States use ranked choice voting now. Some states use it in party elections, and then some states, especially in the Southeast, and we should add Georgia now, use ranked ballots for military and overseas voting because they often have runoffs and don't have time to send out new ballots for the runoff.
And if we'd shown this map 5 years ago, there would have been no colors, except in Massachusetts. And ranked choice voting is used all over the world as well. And in all the ways that Kit mentioned for the United States, some use it for their national legislatures, some use it for local elections, some use it parties use it both to elect leadership and to select candidates in all of these countries.
Okay, so we did a single winner ranked choice election, and now we're going to choose an animal council. We're going to run another election. So if someone would please put the link to the animal council ballot in the chat. And I have to tell you, the turtle didn't make the filing deadline. So we're going to be choosing between the first 5 candidates. And you'll choose, you might identify with one animal and vote for that animal, but then you can also put in your opinion on the other animals and rank all 5 animals in order of preference. So do you all see a link to a ballot?
Yes, I once again posted the link in the chat on YouTube where it's a live link, as well as here on the YouTube screen. So if you can see either of those links and you're in the audience or on the panel, please go to the page in question.
And also for people who are watching this on a recording, these links will be active for quite a while. And you can go and continue voting and then click the results and see if anything changed. So consider well what would be a good, oh my gosh, some of you are fast. We've got 16 votes already.
Yes, indeed. Keep voting. And as soon as I see the shared screen, I'll be able to promote it to the main view.
Okay. I keep having to refresh my screen. The votes don't come in
Now, David
Wow.
Wood is wondering if we can see the manifestos of the candidates again.
Oh yes, thank you. Of course, that's a great idea. Let's see. There's the manifestos of the candidates. I forgot to go over that. That's the meerkat is all about consensus. The alpaca is diversity and getting along well with others. The giraffe is a listener. The coyote is adaptable, and the owl is wise, and the turtle is just too slow. Sorry, turtle.
We have an amusing comment from Daniel Twett, who says he voted based on brain size.
Okay. Well, we didn't have a whale in here, did we? Maybe next year. Yeah.
I didn't see the turtle as an option when I was.
No, the turtle didn't make the filing deadline.
Didn't make it.
Just too slow.
It's a shame because turtles are, of course, known for their longevity. And I think a lot of our transhumanist viewers would have readily voted for a negligibly senescent creature.
Yes. Good point. Well, let me see how. Let's see. We've got 19 votes, 26 votes. Okay, I think we're ready to roll here.
Yes, and I think you will need to separately share the page of results, but I will also link to them in the.
Yes. Okay, so we have 26 votes in. Now, in our first election, we elected, I'll go back to round one here. In our first election, we elected one dessert, and that's comparable to an election where you only elect like one mayor or governor. This time, we're electing an animal mascot council, and we'll be electing 3 representatives from this one ballot. And that's because at FairVote Washington, we are big proponents of proportional ranked choice voting for a council or commission. So not only is majority rule important, but minority representation is important as well. And if a group is 1/3 of a community or 1/3 of the voters, that group should have the power to elect 1/3 of the representatives. So let's walk through what happened in that election. In a proportional election, ranked choice voting election, a candidate needs to cross a threshold of votes that guarantees a seat. And in this election, that is this dotted line here, which is 7 votes. So Owl has definitely crossed the threshold and has a seat. And they have 3 more votes than they need to get a seat on the council. So now the next step in a proportional ranked choice election is to look for the excess votes for Owl and give those votes to those voters' second choices. Because it wouldn't be fair to the voters who vote for a really popular candidate to ignore their second choices. Say if 75% of the voters backed Owl, we wouldn't let 25% of the people select the other 2 candidates. So what we're going to do is go to the next round and see what the next choice is for the excess Owl voters. And they went, 3 went to giraffe, 2 went to meerkat, and 1 went to coyote. So giraffe now has the 7 that they need to be on the council. And we need 1 more candidate.
And so does coyote.
Coyote has 6 votes now. Meerkat.
In the second round, he has 7.
Oh, okay. I haven't looked at the second round yet. I'm looking at the screen I'm sharing with the group. But so now we've
I'm looking at the end result. Sorry.
That's okay. So we go to now it's between Meerkat and Coyote. I'm not sure how this app is going to do this. So we'll click next and see what they may flip a coin. Oh, they did not. Let's go back. Good. Your screen is doing differently from mine. So
Sure is.
yeah. So it looks like they flipped a coin for the third candidate. So now we have our three candidates, three representatives, and you can see more people had a say in their the final representatives. So if this had been a single winner election, say 3 districts that each elect 1 council member, 2 of the 3 districts would have 2 candidates. And since our friend Turtle didn't make the filing deadline, 1 district would only have 1 candidate. So we could get majority winners in each election of these 3 districts, and maybe 51 or 55% of the people would elect someone, but that leaves out almost half the electorate. By running all 5 candidates in a pool, more voters get to say who they want. Voters have more choices about who they vote for, and more voters get to elect a candidate that they like.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting that David Wood pointed out that a 27th vote was included since your demonstration kit, and that actually altered the results. So if you refresh your screen, you will find that the results now differ slightly. And I think that's what Stoney was referring to when he was seeing different results. And I think
that was after my second vote.
Now, that's another thing about these wonderful online apps. Sometimes you can vote early and vote often.
So I think that speaks to the power that a single individual's vote can wield in a ranked choice system, which is not really the case in a plurality or winner-take-all system. So here is the 27 vote outcome that we see on the screen.
Here, right? Yes, it does. It makes a difference, especially when you have a small pool of voters like this. When you have like 27 voters, 1 vote makes a huge difference. So here's round 1. Owl has a seat. We're going to move the XX votes. Oh, in round 2. Oh, we only got to round 2 here. Wow.
So am I seeing it right that some of the Owl's votes were moved over?
Yes. See,
yes.
So we moved 7 votes is the threshold. Owl has 10, so we're going to move 3 votes. Let's see how this app, I'm sort of new to this app. So Owl lost 3 votes. It looks to me like they did 2 rounds in 1. It looks like to me they moved Owl's 3 votes and they eliminated Alpaca at the same time. So there are 6 votes that are in a different place. 3 for Giraffe, 1 for Coyote, and 2 for Meerkat.
So one question that I have about this is, given that Owl had 10 votes, now Owl has 7 votes. How does the system decide which 3 of the 10 votes to reallocate?
Oh, spoken like a true actuary. Yes, good job. The software can use fractional votes. So they look at all the votes that were voted for Owl, and then they look at all the second choice votes and say there were, and they divide those votes into, I'm not sure I can explain it very well, but it's done fractionally. Does that make, can you explain it, Gennady?
So that's interesting. So let's say there are 10 votes for Owl, and out of those votes, 5 people placed Coyote as their second choice, just as a hypothetical. Does that mean because there are 3 votes being reallocated, that then 1.5 of those reallocated votes will go to Coyote. And if that's the case, why aren't we seeing fractional vote totals on the subsequent rounds?
Because this app simplifies things. That's why.
That's a, you know what though, Gennady, I think I've seen it do, I think I've seen this app do fractional votes. I think I've,
If you were to do this in OpaVote, it would certainly show fractional votes.
okay, maybe it was OpaVote that had the fractional votes. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. But
you're right, Gennady. It should, if this were actual election software, we would see lots of fractional votes.
Yes.
And I have a demo in another slideshow, which is available today if you want to see it, that shows fractional votes.
Yes, I think we could perhaps take a look at that after the current presentation concludes. But it does seem like a lot of our viewers are curious about this mechanism and want to learn about it in greater detail. David Wood asked, were 3 of the Owls' votes picked at random, or was it calculated proportionally based on all 10 of the Owls' second votes? And it seems that the second case is the answer. And
yes.
Mike Lazine was also saying that he was thinking that as well with regard to the proportional allocation and how it's performed. I think from my standpoint, the key is that there always be an objective rule about how to do this in any given situation so that nobody has to make a discretionary decision during any of the intermediate rounds.
Nope.
And Lisa, go ahead.
May I just add quickly, election results do need to be auditable. So we need to make sure that, when we come back, if there's a close race, that we come back later and we can get exactly the same results. So this oversimplified idea that you're going to sort of take 3 votes, maybe the most recent 3 votes for Al and transfer them is a nice simplified way of looking at it. But in reality, it's exactly what your other viewer, David, said. The votes are reallocated proportionately. So one way that I like to explain it, just as a very high level, this method of using ranked choice voting to ensure proportional results is sometimes called the single transferable vote, STV. And that it's a form of ranked choice voting that we use to elect multiple winners. With a single transferable vote, each voter has 1 vote. And if you need to spend your entire vote in order to get your number 1 candidate elected, then your vote will be fully allocated to that candidate. But as Kit just explained, if your favorite is also very popular and has more votes than needed, then it's like as if you had $1 to spend to get your candidates elected, and you don't need to spend your whole dollar to get your favorite candidate. You only need, say, 75 cents. Well, you want your extra 25 cents to go to get your next favorite candidate elected, and so on. And that's one way to think about how single transferable vote works. I know that we don't want to derail Kit too far on the presentation. We can definitely get more into the weeds for that, how those votes are counted a little bit later, if you wish.
Yes, indeed. And I think, Kit, feel free to bring up your screen for the continuation of the presentation. In the meantime, I do think it's a good occasion to bring in a comment from David Wood. He says, the advantage of the software isn't just to avoid tedium, but also to reduce the chances of clerical errors when the rounds are operated manually. And I think we see that in particular in the case of the single transferable vote or the proportional ranked choice voting, where fractions of votes are being reallocated. That would be extremely challenging to do manually. Not that it can't be done, but it would be time consuming and prone to error. What we have done with the U.S. Transhumanist Party thus far is to use ranked choice voting for a single outcome with 1 or more candidates being eliminated each round. So there are no fractional votes there. But when you start introducing proportional allocations and fractional votes, I think having a program do it is the only sensible approach.
Thanks. Do you see the animals again?
Yes.
Great. Okay, I'm going to review what ranked choice voting is. It's really an umbrella term that refers to the type of ballot used in which the voter can rank their candidates in order of preference instead of making a single choice. And the ideas are simple, but the language can get complicated. So I just want to talk about a few more terms that you'll come across. So go back other way. So ranked choice voting is also known as rank choice voting, as ranked voting, and preferential voting. And the U.S. Transhumanist Party is unique, as far as I can tell, in the term ranked preference voting, but it's all referring to a form of ranked choice voting. There are many ways to describe the same thing. So single winner ranked choice voting is the method we used with desserts to elect apple pie. It's also called instant runoff voting, or IRV, and it's the most common alternative voting method in the United States. It's used for executive races like mayor, governor, treasurer, or to elect one representative from your district, or a pie. And multi-winner ranked choice voting is the method we use with the Animal Council. This specific form that we used is called single transferable vote, like Lisa said, STV. Another way to describe multi-winner ranked choice voting is proportional ranked choice voting for bodies like legislatures, councils, and commissions, etc. So I hope that makes things clear. What you need to know is that we're advocating for two forms of ranked choice voting, a single winner ranked choice voting and a multi-winner ranked choice voting. So while different kinds of ranked choice voting have been spreading across the country rapidly the last few years, this isn't actually America's first experience with ranked choice voting. America's experience with ranked choice voting dates back to the progressive era in the late progressive era in the early 20th century. So between 1912 and 1947, 11 states used ranked choice voting for statewide party primaries, and at least 24 cities used ranked choice voting in the STV form for municipal elections. And then most of them repealed ranked choice voting and proportional ranked choice voting after the reforms resulted in more representation for political and racial minorities. In other words, it worked, but it's spurred aggressive backlash from dominant party organizations in particular, and only 2 cities resisted appeal. To this day, Arden, Delaware, and Cambridge, Massachusetts use proportional ranked choice voting for certain municipal elections.
So, as Kit said, those are the only cities still using proportional ranked choice voting. I'm looking at my notes, so I don't know what's on the screen for everybody else at this point.
We have the Cambridge, Massachusetts City Council.
Right. Well, and so they're elected just the way we elected the Animal Council just now. And so Kit's going to tell us about legislation in Washington.
Okay, maybe Chris or Lisa could put the link for this little video in the chat. So we're not going to show this video in the bottom right of the screen, Politics in the Animal Kingdom. It's another Animal Council election. CGP Grey is a video artist who does lots of wonderful YouTube videos, and he does a lot of election videos, and this one is a lot of fun. If you have time to look at that. So proportional ranked choice voting, it not only gives equitable representation to racial and political minorities, because you can have larger districts and these candidates are running in a pool, it neutralizes gerrymandering. And that is a tremendous benefit, as you can all imagine. So now to what's coming for Washington State in the legislative session and in local campaigns. So we have a bill in the Washington State Legislature. The local options bill is in its 5th year in the Washington legislature, which is normal for new legislation. We think it has a great chance to pass this next session, which starts in January. This local options bill would give local jurisdictions the option to use ranked choice voting if they wanted. It's not allowed in most places in Washington by law right now. And we anticipate that it'll be ready to come up for a vote on the House floor pretty quickly. And we're working to line up even more support. And then we are planning a new bill to allow ranked choice voting or to institute ranked choice voting for presidential primaries. This is a national movement, and we're counting on some national support for this. And we think it's a great idea, particularly with Washington State has vote by mail. And in 2020, almost 400,000 votes in the presidential primaries didn't count because the candidates some of the candidates dropped out before the election. So those voters who voted for Elizabeth Warren, Pete Buttigieg, and others didn't have a second choice. If they'd had a second choice, they would have had a say in the primary. So FairVote Washington is also lining up some local campaigns in 2022. 2 counties are looking to working on putting charter amendments in front of the voters in their 2022 November ballot. They're not locked in yet, but this will be awesome. Shift. And Stoney, tell us about the Fair Representation Act.
Okay, so this is a bill in Congress. It's been there for 2 or 3 years now, and it would bring ranked choice voting, proportional ranked choice voting to elections to Congress. You can see the state of Virginia in this image, the way it is with district level elections up above, and then multi-winner elections down below. The bill number, if this is of interest, is HR 3863. And the other thing about the national scene is that there are organizations often affiliated with FairVote in virtually every state, agitating to get ranked choice voting adopted for elections in those states. And as we mentioned, there are many states that have it now in one form or another, and 5 years ago there was only Massachusetts and Delaware. So that's about it.
Yes.
Indeed. It's quite encouraging that there has been so much progress over the past 5 years that now Maine and Alaska have implemented ranked choice voting or ranked preference voting in the U.S. Transhumanist Party's terminology. And there is the Fair Representation Act. Here's a link by which people might be able to find it. I have highlighted it now. And thank you for your presentation as well. We enjoyed the demonstrations. I think they got our viewers quite engaged also. And we are going to hopefully be able to explore some of the details of the fractional vote redistribution. Our longtime member and supporter, Mike DeVerde, stated that he wants to see a fractional vote redistribution example. So Stoney, you said you have that in another slideshow. We would be happy if you could present that, but while you are preparing for it, we do have a few other questions and comments. So I am interested to hear what the panel thinks as well about ranked choice voting. I know, Jason, you had a comment about how the owls votes were redistributed. So let's see, Jason, I don't know if you can hear us, but in the meantime, David.
Yeah,
yes, go ahead.
I'm here. I was just making a comment on YouTube. Yeah, I was thinking that that app could have been a little more clear at where them owls votes went. I noticed. I ran across a whole lot of other programs. Have you guys checked out any other programs besides just this Ranked It one?
Yes, sometimes I use RCV-tally-app, and often we use OPA-vote. The reason I didn't use OPA-vote is that the election expires in 10 weeks, and then people wouldn't be able to use it past that time. And this ranked vote is a bit new for me. Yeah. But I used it because it can do single winner and multi-winner elections. The one I've been using is all single winner elections. OPA vote is really versatile, and that is the app that's used by FairVote National. Yeah. So that's if you were running a transhumanist election. There are actually several other choices. Chris, would you like to tell us some more about
I was just I'm trying to come up with some URLs to add. Let's see. So OPA Vote is a pay and somewhat free system that is very useful and can be used for actual elections. So it's been around for a long time and has a lot of good features. But it's not super flashy. The one that you use today is a new software, and the guy who's developing that has been very active in the ranked choice voting community. He actually has added a bunch of really great features to help with the education around ranked choice voting. So he did things in conjunction with the primary in New York City that happened to help people learn more about it. So that's a pretty neat software, but we're new to using it. It's a new piece of software. One of the other links that was just shown is Rank It. And Rank It is a very sort of a simplistic software that FairVote National created just for polls, for fun things like this. It wouldn't be used for an actual election for an organization. But it is super accessible, and I really recommend that one for quick things. They all have slightly different versions of how they display their results and whatnot. And I mean, if you're getting, I know that the Transhumanist Party was using some software on GitHub to do some, their tallying, and you can actually take those Google form results, and I believe you could use OPA Vote to do a count. It's basically and not have a web interface, but use it as your tabulator. So there's a lot of options out there.
Interesting. Yes, thank you very much for this, Chris. And I think the amount of software options has certainly proliferated in recent years. In 2016, when I was looking into ranked choice voting tabulation options, really, I didn't see anything that was even partially free. And so we had to engineer our own approach, and it works. And we use the GitHub program that you mentioned. It was created by Peter Grassberger in order to validate the results. So after I go through a manual Excel tabulation, I can also input the data from Google Forms in a comma-separated format into the GitHub app, and it will also go through the sequence of instant runoffs. And if my results match the GitHub apps results, then I know I tabulated them correctly. And that way there's also another check on our internal workflow. So that has been how we have done it, but we are quite interested in more efficient, more streamlined ways, because that would enable us to hold more frequent elections and offer more options for our members to consider. Stoney, I believe you have some comments on
Yeah,
this.
I just want to mention that Kit has put the Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center in the chat. They have a universal, as she says, a free, universal, certified tabulator that works with official election software and presumably with a database that someone collects in an Excel spreadsheet. I don't know whether that's true or not, but this software is also available.
Excellent. Yes, and I have highlighted the Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center website here for anybody who wishes to explore that. Now, I would like to go to a comment that was made previously by David Wood, and David Wood noted that Andrew Yang is campaigning for ranked choice voting and open primaries, whereas at least some of the presenters today have suggested that there is no need for primaries, at least in the way they're held right now. So what are the arguments for and against primaries, and how could primaries be compatible with ranked choice voting? My understanding would be the primary would be, in this case, internal to the party to decide which nominee of a particular political party gets advanced to the general election. And then in the general election, as well as in the primary, a ranked choice voting approach could be utilized. Lisa, please go ahead.
I'll start with a really high level comment, and then I know that Stoney may wish to follow up. Just to point out that ranked choice voting is just a tool, and it can be used in a variety of formats. It can be used with or without a primary. The vast majority of cities that use ranked choice voting now, as Kit said, it's almost 50 now in the US, do that, prefer to use it without a primary. It for all the reasons that Stoney elaborated earlier. It's more efficient, save costs, and so on. But there are times when it can make sense to have a primary, no doubt about it. And the state of Maine and the state of Alaska are both choosing to use ranked choice voting with primaries. And so there is no one way to use ranked choice voting. Stoney, would you like to add anything?
Yes. Gennady, you mentioned that Andrew Yang is campaigning for open primaries, which incidentally is what we have in Washington State. It's not a party primary. All the candidates of all parties all participate in the one primary. And if it is a party primary, here's the problem. Typically around the United States, about 30% of the electorate identifies with the Republican Party, about 30% identify with the Democratic Party, but 40% are independent. And if you have a party primary, it's just the 30% here and the 30% there who are participating in choosing the candidates. So it's another way that the politics of the United States is distorted by the two-party system.
And I'll just quickly add then that in Maine, they use ranked choice voting in their closed party primaries. And in Alaska, they're just about to move to open primaries where they're going to use ranked choice voting. Actually not in the primary. They're going to use it only in the general. They're going to use an open primary. Voters will get to just pick one candidate in the primary, and then they'll send the top 4 vote getters to their general election, and voters will rank their candidates there. So there are lots of different ways that ranked choice voting is being used around the country right now. Be very, very interesting to watch.
Yes, indeed. And David Wood has mentioned Alaska Measure 2 that passed in 2020 in the chat. So I have linked here to the Wikipedia article on that measure. And as you mentioned, this is a measure that combines open primaries with ranked choice voting in the general election. But it's true that there seem to be many possible permutations to consider. Now, I'm wondering with regard to open primaries, I can see the advantage of that for, say, the Republican or Democratic Party primaries, or if any other party ever comes to have this major party status. But for minor political parties that seem to be more coalesced around specific worldviews or policy positions, like the Libertarian Party, the Green Party, even the Transhumanist Party, would you agree that there could be a risk to an open primary if we allow non-members of that party to vote in selecting that party's nominee? Perhaps the Libertarian Party could be infiltrated by a lot of socialists who think it might be amusing to put a Marxist in as the Libertarian nominee, and that simply wouldn't align with the Libertarian Party's values. So would you say the open primary concept is better suited for major political parties?
So my immediate thought is minor parties would have a better chance in an open primary, because all the voters, not just the voters of a particular party, get to choose which candidates they want to have in the general election. And in Washington state, we have a top 2 primary. Only the top 2 vote getters in the primary, whatever their party, get into the general election. As Lisa said, they have I think, is this right, Lisa? They have a top 4 primary in Alaska. The local options bill allows local jurisdictions in Washington state, once it's passed, would allow local jurisdictions to have a top 5 primary. So there are all those variations too. But if it's a top 2 primary, pretty much minority parties or small parties are excluded. But with a top 5 or without having a primary, then they have a chance. And it's not that you're picking the candidate of a party. You're just picking from among all the candidates who have presented themselves, who is going to go into the general election.
So in this case, there would only be one primary statewide. There wouldn't be a Republican primary or a Democratic primary or
Correct.
a Libertarian primary. And I know California does something along these lines, and then it has a top 2 system
Yes.
for the general election. The issue is it's very difficult for a candidate who is not from one of the major parties to even make it to the general election. And in California, the top 2 system generally results in a Democrat running against a Democrat. So what about going the other way, and instead of having primaries at all, just have a single open general election, no ballot access thresholds, anybody can run. People can rank order as many candidates as they wish. They could rank order 2 or 3, or they could rank order 500 if 500 candidates run. And then the instant runoffs, if they can be done instantly via software, would not pose a challenge to any decently designed computer program today, and you could have a result the same day, even if there are hundreds or thousands of options. What are your thoughts on that possibility?
I'd like to jump in on this one. So the idea of having that general primary, or sorry, the general election with all the candidates and ranking everything is, we agree that that is the way that the most voters would have the most access. But if, like you said, there was low threshold to getting on the ballot and you have 30 candidates, it's a bit of overload, as well as the fact that the software, it's not just software. There's actually like a paper ballot, and you have to have the mechanism for filling in that ballot. And so a lot of people have, there's a, I forgot the name of the research group, but they've done some analysis of ballots, and they find that, around 5 rankings seems to be pretty accessible for people. And so one way to do this is to have an open ranked, actually a proportional ranked choice voting primary, and then you winnow it down to 5 candidates, and then you move on to, again, a single winner ranked choice voting general if you're trying to get one winner, or multi-winner if you're going that way. But the idea is that you use it as a winnowing process to get a more reasonable set of candidates in front of the voters for that general election. But only if you have more than 5 candidates, right? So one of the things about our local options bill is that we've written in there that if you have a top 5 primary and you only get up to 5 candidates filing for any given position, you can just skip the primary and just move it over to the general, because there's no reason to run that first one.
Yes, and that's an interesting point, to use ranked choice voting in the primaries as a winnowing mechanism, because of essentially the cognitive burden that having so many options puts on a lot of voters. So in 2019, the US Transhumanist Party held a ranked preference primary for its nominee for president of the United States. And let's say that was an interesting experience, but the aspect of that experience that I want to highlight is that we had 9 options, and I made the decision to mandate that voters rank all 9. And the reason why I did that, I did it very consciously, is that some people were treating the ranked choice primary as if it were a plurality vote. And especially the leading 2 candidates engaged in a lot of reprehensible behavior toward one another, because they were still operating in this plurality, winner-take-all system mentality. So they would engage in attacks on other candidates. They would not try to form coalitions. They would employ these scorched earth tactics, not realizing that in a ranked choice system, there's no incentive to do that. They just didn't understand, and instead they saw the primary as a publicity contest. So if I had allowed people to only rank the number of options they preferred, then some of the loyalists of these candidates would rank them at the top, and that would be it. And the outcome would be similar to a plurality vote. By requiring the ranking of all 9 options, I aim to avert that possibility. However, what that led to was a lot of need for technical support, because some people couldn't submit their ballots. They had to fill out that entire grid. But I helped them. I put in the time, and ultimately I made sure that everybody who wanted to vote got a chance to vote. However, if you need to scale that up even an order of magnitude, then that becomes difficult from a logistical perspective. So in another situation where everybody understands what ranked choice voting is and what it's intended to do, I think probably having maximum 6, 7 options, and then allowing people to rank order whichever ones they want, up to and including no option except the one that they favor, I think could work reasonably well. So Chris, you put in a link for the Center for Civic Design. Perhaps you could explain that a bit.
Yeah, it was the organization I was trying to remember who has done a lot of analysis on ballots and the way to organize them so that they are the best for people to use when in an election in the United States. So they've done a lot of research about page layout, white space, the wording, all these kinds of things, the number of rankings, the style of rankings. And so it's a lot of really good information for people who are election officials.
Yes, indeed. So thank you for sharing that, Chris. And now we have a question from Jason, who wonders, can someone explain how ranked choice voting could help to eliminate gerrymandering?
I've got a slide that might help that a lot. Let's see if I can get to it. There's a
All right. So
one.
while we are preparing for that, I believe we have it available now. Kit, please proceed.
Okay, so this is real simplified, Jason, but you're familiar with gerrymandering. So we have say we're 50 precincts here. We're going on the left. We want to say traditionally they're divided into 5 districts. And in the middle, if you divide them in 5 districts with lines straight across, even though 40% of the voters are red, blue wins every district. And on the right, there's another way of dividing these districts. And even though red is 40% and blue is 60%, the red gets 60% of the seats instead of 40, and the blue gets 40% of the seats instead of the 60% of their voters. So it's almost easier to gerrymander than it is to draw fair districts. But if we go back over to the left, if these 5 districts, each electing 1 representative, were combined into one big district, and all the candidates for all the districts ran in a pool, the way we ran the animal council, then 60% of the voters would get 60% of the representatives, and 40% of the voters would get 40% of the representatives. So a bigger district is just more difficult to gerrymander. A bigger district is going to have fewer lines in it, for one thing. So just mathematically, it's a lot more difficult to gerrymander a larger district. Jason, does that answer your question? Do you have more to?
Well, kind of. Doesn't that kind of assume that we're getting rid of the? I mean, ranked choice voting doesn't automatically say that there's only one district, right? I mean,
oh, it's the proportional ranked choice voting part. Yes, you're right. Okay. You're right. The single winner ranked choice voting does not affect this so much, but the multi-winner form of ranked choice voting, the single transferable vote, is what makes the difference here.
May I add a comment? I think the big conceptual leap is you're going to have 5 winners from that, from the race that Kit's talking about. 5 winners all in one race, rather than 5 representatives each elected in a single winner race. It's a little bit like if you have a whole big group of friends over. Let's say you got 20 or 30 friends over, and you're going to order pizza. Instead of getting just one huge pizza that's one flavor, and then you're going to have a whole bunch of people who don't like it, instead you might say, oh, let's order 5 pizzas, and that way we could have maybe 2 veggie and 3 meat pizzas, and that way more people are going to get something they like. Instead of just ordering one big pizza, order 5 different ones,
or instead of ordering 5 of the same kind of pizza. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So do you guys think this might have any effect on the lobbying industry? I mean, hopefully it would have a good effect. I'm just wondering, because if it makes it harder to figure out who's really going to win, does it make it harder for you to figure out where you're going to put your money? And would that give the lobbyists some trouble in that regard? I don't know. It's kind of hard to see on the other side of what all it would do.
Well, the representatives and lobbyists are definitely concerned that this would make things different. You know, how it's a lot harder to game the system, and so that's some of their job. So
it definitely makes elections more competitive and harder to predict. Yeah, harder to game.
Right, and more people run, more people who aren't supported by the present official supports of lobbying and the two major political parties, but lots of more diverse people run. In the New York City election that just happened, the New York City Council is more diverse than it ever has been, and that's because they use ranked choice voting. More diverse candidates ran, more diverse candidates got elected.
And that was the single winner form of ranked choice voting. Yeah.
Indeed. It's interesting. Jason Mallory uses a hashtag here called Scramble the Wallets. If you have more candidates running with a broader base of financial support, then there aren't just a few concentrated special interests who are funding the established candidates. And I think that throws a lot of the lobbyists off base because they're used to just appealing on behalf of a few prominent clients to a few familiar politicians with whom they've established relationships. And now there are all of these new people coming into the system and competing, and they're unknown quantities. But I would say if the lobbyists feel uncomfortable with that, let them feel uncomfortable. By and large, they deserve to. And I have some familiarity with the lobbying scene. I am thankfully not a lobbyist, but I have sometimes found myself in gatherings of lobbyists. And I have to say, whatever can disrupt that status quo is a welcome improvement. So we have a very generous super chat from Celeste Castaldo. Thank you very much, Celeste. And she has a comment that I would like to highlight. And this is relevant to what was just discussed. She writes, the dual party majority system in the US would radically change if with an RCV system, smaller parties like the Green and the Libertarian and the Transhumanist parties would have a greater chance of winning. And this is precisely what we're seeking to do. We want greater diversity of candidates, greater diversity of ideas, approaches toward solving the persistent challenges within the American political system. Because right now, certainly we don't live in a truly democratic small d or truly representative society. Indeed, Princeton has done a study during the past decade which concluded that the US has recently been an oligarchy since the 1980s because of how few interests actually have real influence in the system. And interestingly enough, we have concurrence with my characterization of lobbyists from Mike Lazine, who writes good points, Gennady, on lobbyists. Thank you to Mike. And also, I wanted to highlight a documentary that Mike DeVerde recommended on Maine's experience, which is entitled The Battle for Ranked Choice Voting. It's a documentary by another organization in the space, Rank the Vote. I watched it several weeks ago, and it was quite fascinating to me to see all of the machinations by the governor of Maine, Governor LePage, and the legislature and the Secretary of State to prevent ranked choice voting from being implemented, even though the voters supported it, and then the voters supported it again. And the organization promoting it in Maine really had to rally its volunteers several times, even after they had won, in order to prevent the elected officials from derailing that initiative. And along these lines, Chasing Bob wonders, what are the main objections to ranked choice voting coming from these established interests or anybody else who dislikes that leads to
what I was
such
wondering.
intense pushback? So if you could address that, I think it would help us get some perspective into what our opponents on this issue are thinking.
May I have a
Go ahead.
I'll say that there are a bunch of objections that we hear. Some of them are either just not supported by experience or actually disingenuous. So we can talk about what some of those are. And then there are a set of what I would say legitimate questions, concerns. And that second set of legitimate concerns really largely have to do with logistics and resources, making sure that election administrators have the hardware, the software that they need, and the resources to educate voters. That's primarily where the set of legitimate concerns lie. With respect to some of the either disingenuous or concerns that really have not been borne out by evidence or facts, I'll let Stoney. You had some in mind as well.
There are just some wonderful stories about places in the United States that adopted ranked choice voting, as Kit said, in the early 20th century, and then abandoned it. One of them was New York City, which adopted ranked choice voting for the city council in the 30s, and God forbid, proceeded to elect a communist. And so after the war, when the Red Scare hit big time, the city fathers got rid of it because it had succeeded. And the other story is about Cincinnati, where the city fathers decided to adopt ranked choice voting in the 20s, specifically so that the Black population of Cincinnati would get some representation on the city council. Well, the practice in Cincinnati was that the city council candidate who got the highest popular vote would be the mayor. And in the 50s, that turned out to be a Black guy. And they said horrors and abandoned it again.
And the same thing happened
again
in
because it worked.
Yeah, Ann Arbor elected a Black mayor in their first use of ranked choice voting in about 1972. Immediately abandoned it, and then just this last week in November, our most recent November election, Ann Arbor has chosen to adopt ranked choice voting again. So, the most common sort of disingenuous comments that we tend to hear are that, it will be much too confusing for voters. It's going to lead to lower voter turnout because voters are going to be so confused that they won't vote. Some people say that it does not uphold one person, one vote. That's just wrong. It's gone all the way to
voters are stupid argument. I never believed in that one.
So there's an array of objections that we hear that are sort of along those lines that just aren't accurate.
On the point about whether the voters like it, I mentioned the New York City election that just occurred. There was polling before the election and after the election. And before the election, it was about, are you planning on voting? And the voters said, you bet. And the turnout was actually greater than it has been in New York City since for over 30 years. And then after the polling, after the election, the polling was, what did you think of the experience? And they said it was easy, and we liked it, and our votes are much more likely to count. That's great.
I'll add one more set of objections tends to come from people who don't like the current method that we use for voting any more than we do, but they have a different alternative voting method that they're particularly in favor of, and there are several. And sometimes those folks can get so passionate about their preferred method that they can start saying things that, again, aren't entirely accurate about ranked choice voting. So sometimes we'll hear some passionate disapproval of ranked choice voting from fans of other voting methods, but that's generally anything else to add, Chris, Kit, Stoney, in terms of main objections?
want to add that one of the worst things I've heard is that people of color will be disadvantaged by ranked choice voting because they're not smart enough to understand it, or too many of them are not smart enough to understand it. And the data shows that that is not the case at all, that people of color in New York City really liked it a lot. In fact, the representation of people of color and of women went way up in their ranked choice election.
I would add, when it comes to gerrymandering, there is a long-standing, movement to use districting as a way to solve representation problems, right? And so that has been a remedy that has been used in a number of places where they're like, well, at-large elections does not allow a minority group, whatever group that is, to get any representation. So the solution when you have single winner is to have districts, and then you can break up the population so that a minority group can get enough voters in a given district to become what is called a minority majority district, and therefore they can get representation. And there's still, as we try to explain here, if you changed to a single district and you used a proportional ranked choice voting process to elect multiple representatives for that larger district, you would actually get better results. But there's a lot of pushback to say, well, wait a minute, we changed from an at-large district to districting on purpose to help minority groups. So it's a slow process to get over that entrenched feeling that is the only way that they can get their representation. So we're trying to, get the word out that a proportional tabulation of a ranked ballot with a multi-winner, multi-member, larger district is actually the only way that you can get rid of the effects of gerrymandering and get good representation. And Stoney, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I think of there being three kinds of gerrymandering. There's the partisan gerrymandering, where the politicians sit in the back room and draw the lines for the districts to make sure they're going to be reelected. And that's the kind that people mostly think of. Secondly, there's the virtuous gerrymandering, which is what Chris just described, aimed at getting representation for some group that has been excluded from representation in the past. But the real key to it is that with winner-take-all elections, there is inherent gerrymandering, no matter who is drawing the lines and for whatever purposes they have or no purposes. Just drawing the lines means you're enclosing a certain composition of voters, and that's it. That's to a great extent predetermination of the election results for years to come, just because the lines are drawn in any way at all. And you can't get away from it if you have winner-take-all elections.
Yes, thank you. And I agree. It's very difficult to pursue an objective approach toward selecting the boundaries of a district if there is a winner-take-all system in place. And in the U.S. Transhumanist Party, we have favored proportional representation as a solution to that as well. Now, I'm curious what any of you have to say about this comment from David Wood, who writes, one objection to ranked choice voting heard in the UK is that governments would end up in a hopeless coalition of multiple small parties, many of which are fringe, and some people characterize this as being like in Israel. Now, I'm all in favor of multiple small parties, including so-called fringe parties, being in a coalition, because that means people of diverse ideologies get to talk to one another, and points of view that haven't been considered before actually enter the discussion. And yet the parties still have to find a viable compromise or middle ground or pragmatic way forward in order for the government to function, I think that allows the best ideas to be utilized among all of the available options, and it still prevents the least viable, least acceptable to the majority of the population ideas from being implemented. So what are everyone's thoughts on this objection?
I side with you, Gennady.
Thank
you, Stoney. And Lisa, you had some thoughts.
I can just make one comment, which is this is all about setting the threshold that you want. Do you, for your city council or your national state assembly, what's reasonable? A group that has 1% of the support of the community, do you want that group to have representation on your council, or do you want to set a threshold higher, 20%, something like that? So that determines how many representatives you're going to elect from each district. So generally, FairVote Washington has not created legislation yet where we've come down as a clear policy decision on what that threshold should be. But in general, what we're looking at is something around districts that would elect around 5, 6, maybe as many as 7 representatives from the same district, and that would mean a threshold that's higher than 10%. So 10 to 15%, and that's a substantial enough threshold of support you would need so that you're less likely to have what some people might define as fringe. On the other hand, it's also the case that one of the things that can be really helpful for providing more stability for a democracy is to go ahead and have even what you might define as a fringe group, have them have representation on the elected body, and it creates a sort of a pressure release valve that those folks who may hold really very distinctly minority views can at least have a seat at the table, have a chance to express their views, and need to be part of the process. So, there's lots of it's not an either or. It's not like, oh, you use proportional ranked choice voting, suddenly you're going to be Israel or Italy or whatever country people want to put up there as an example. It's just again, it's a question of where do you want the threshold to be, and that can be different depending on the method that gets adopted, and it's the number of representatives that get elected in each single race. How many elected representatives are you going to elect?
Yes.
If it's 3 representatives, then the threshold is 25%, and that's pretty significant. Most people would agree that if a group of people in your community have 25% of the vote, it makes reasonable sense for them to have a seat at the table.
Yes, indeed. And I fully agree with what you said, Lisa, and it seems David Wood agrees with my outlook on this as well. He writes, I side with you on this too, Gennady. The opposition to ranked choice voting comes from people in parties who lack the skills and the aptitude to operate in constructive coalitions. So I would like to bring up a few more items. First of all, thank you to Alan Crowley for your generous super chat. We always appreciate anybody who contributes to continuing to make these kinds of productions possible. Now, John H. writes, with regard to the opposition to ranked choice voting, power concedes nothing without demands, and he thinks this is what is driving a lot of the resistance from status quo figures, elected officials, secretaries of state, who seem to be benefited by the current system, as well as lobbyists, as we discussed before. However, Mike DeVerde points out that Maine is a great example where the powerful blocked ranked choice voting, but the people came back to essentially force the politicians to accept ranked choice voting. So from your perspective, what can be learned from the experience of Maine, and what advocates of ranked choice voting might anticipate in other states in terms of the resistance and how effectively that resistance might be overcome?
I'm glad to make a quick initial comment. One thing, we're very, very glad to have the power of initiative here in Washington State, because we recognize that it's extremely unlikely that our state legislature, for example, that those folks are going to vote to change the election method that elected them. We're working on a local options bill right now that would allow local jurisdictions, cities, counties, school boards to try ranked choice voting if they want. And that's a relatively easy vote for our state legislators to make because it doesn't impact their elections. It's also only a permissive bill. It doesn't mandate anything. But in order to affect change more substantially statewide here in Washington State, we are planning for a statewide ballot initiative. That's a major heavy lift, and planning is already underway, building capacity and funding, and 2024 would be the earliest that we could be ready to do that. But we are already in process getting prepared to do that. And that's the way it's going to need to happen, and that's the way it happened in Maine.
All right, thank you, Lisa. And we have a comment from Chris Mason, who writes, as a movement, getting it passed is just the beginning. We must stay vigilant for repeal efforts. And indeed, there does seem to be a set of special interests who would be eager to advocate for repeal. Now, I think also we should be cognizant of how the issue is perceived. So right now, there's still a lot of public opinion that suggests that one has to kind of bite the metaphorical bullet and vote for the lesser of two evils. And in the 2020 election, I think we saw the worst of that rhetoric, where people were alienating their friends, their family members, others with whom they might have had decent interactions in the absence of this election, because they were saying things like, well, if you don't vote for Biden, then you're enabling Trump to win. Or if you don't vote for Trump, you're enabling Biden to win. And those of us who did vote for third-party candidates were saying, no, we're just voting for the candidates who are closest to our preferences. And sometimes we would bring up ranked choice voting as a way to remedy that kind of situation. But for a lot of the people with entrenched partisan ideas, or ideas that they were voting for a major party to, quote, save our democracy, it seemed that those arguments fell on deaf ears. So how can we communicate this concept in a way that gets most of the public to really understand that this would get them out of that trap and prevent them from compromising their own principles and values? Yes, Stoney, go ahead.
So one of the ways that Kit and I and others here in Bellingham and around the state are addressing that issue is to do tabling at fairs or just on a street corner somewhere. And if you explain to somebody who walks up and has never heard of ranked choice voting before that they would be able to vote for the person they really like without fear that it was going to throw the election to somebody they can't stand, they get it. They love it. And then they sign up on our sheet of people who want to support the idea. People really want to be able to do that.
Yes, indeed. And hopefully they'll have the chance to do that going forward in more and more states in the not too distant future. Now, I'm also curious if Art Ramon has any questions for our guests.
Yeah, as far as the interface, it's very intuitive to do the rank by clicking and dragging the mouse. But what does it look like on in the electronic voting machines at the cities that are doing it? Do you have any idea? Is it radio buttons and columns, or do you click and it automatically sorts in the correct order? Any idea of what those electronic voting machines look like, the interface?
As far as I know, it's always all on paper.
That's a good one for Chris Mason. I think Chris is on top of this.
I don't actually know others, because there's so many states with so many different machines. Some states use paper ballots that you then put into a reader and a scanner in the voting location, the polling location. Some of them have electronic machines, and I really don't actually know what's being used in, say, Minneapolis or in Santa Fe, New Mexico. I mean, there's all these, and like all these cities, 20 some cities in Utah just used ranked choice voting for the first time this last month. So, or this month. For most of the paper ones, the trend seems to be a grid system of radio buttons with the names of the candidates on the left, the rankings across the top, and then you fill in the radio button as appropriate in that grid. San Francisco used to use a system where you drew an arrow, and they only allowed 3 rankings, and then in, I think it was 2021, they changed to allowing 10 rankings, and they're using radio buttons or circles on the paper ballots. So that gives you sort of an overview. I don't have the specifics.
Is that something that maybe you can provide input for, like what works the best and help?
So that's why I
adjust?
shared the Civic Design Center, because they have done this research and they have recommendations.
Here in Washington, we just had our election administrators from all over the state just did a 3-day workshop on ranked choice voting at the end of this is about a month ago, and they had guests from the Center for Civic Design come and present what are the emerging best practices for ballot design for ranked choice elections. And there, at this point, there really are just 2 different varieties now that are still being used. The most common is these. It looks a little bit like an SAT test with each candidate is listed on its own, on his or her own row, and then each column represents a choice: first choice, second choice, third choice, and so on. And you fill in the bubbles that correspond with your candidate, first choice, this and so on. There's another variety where you have all the candidates listed in 3 separate columns, and in the first column you pick your first choice candidate, and in the next column you pick your second choice candidate, and so on. Minneapolis still uses that style of ballot. That one is on the way out at this point because voters are wanting to have more than just 3 choices. And as Chris mentioned, 10 is becoming the kind of the new standard. San Francisco just moved to allowing 10 rankings, but it's basically what I call that bubble grid style. That's the Minneapolis style exactly. You pick, yep, and then. That's the Minneapolis style, and that's still Minneapolis style. And that's the most common style that you would see. Then with 10 voters can choose 10 up to 10 rankings and fill in the bubble that corresponds to your choice.
Yeah, I think I went online earlier before the show and tried to download that, and it's open source. You can download it, but to get one that's already compiled for you, you gotta, there's a link where you can get it to where you just click a button and it installs for you. Well, you got to get permission for that one. So maybe they'd let Gennady, but I didn't even ask that. So maybe.
So it's a lot being developed quickly in this area. Emerging best practices are really coming together quite quickly. But what we are learning, and the exit polling from voters in New York City, this was the largest ever election of ranked choice voting just this last summer. And exit polling was really clear. Voters understood it. 95% of voters said it was simple to understand, easy to use. And so again, we're learning from that ballot design. What is it that, because of course we all understand, ranking your choice is an easy idea, but how do you lay that out on a ballot to make it really clear for voters? And there's actually a lot that election administrators have to consider to do that well. And the good news is that it's, after 20 some years since San Francisco first adopted it in 2004, I think it was, in this most recent kind of iteration of ranked choice, there's been a lot of good development of ballot design.
Excellent.
Gennady, isn't yours a grid system?
Yes, we use a grid system where we have as many rows and columns as there are options. And in most cases, except the 2019 primary that I mentioned, we allow people to rank order as many or as few of the options as they prefer. And in the first column, they'll put their first choice. In the second column, they'll put their second choice. And we constrain the grid so that people are not able to put more than one option in a given column. Now, with paper ballots, that's more difficult to do, because if you have a grid like that on paper and a person puts 2 entries into the first choice column, either that ballot gets disqualified or there has to be some way to interpret that. Do you know of a way around that problem?
Those kinds of problems need to be adjudicated in any kind of election, whether it's ranked choice or not. And those are called rules, the rules that election administrators use to decide when voters have marked their ballots in unusual ways. And if a voter marks 2 different candidates for first choice, my understanding is that's pretty much the end of that ballot. It can't be interpreted.
Spoiled ballots are a common thing in winner-take-all elections. I mean, people mark down 2 candidates in a winner-take-all election, and then their ballot doesn't count for that election.
And one of the things that we're learning is that voters make no more errors in ranked choice elections than they do in our current elections. It happens in both.
Yes, this is interesting. I think this is largely an argument for fully electronic voting, perhaps with a paper trail, but not paper ballots, because paper ballots can be marked every which way. Any sort of competent program will have certain constraints to prevent people from casting nonsensical votes. So people simply won't be able to advance to the next screen. The program will instruct them what they need to correct in their selection in order for their vote to count. And it's interesting too, Celeste Castaldo brings up a list of countries, and I know this was mentioned in your presentation as well, where ranked voting is used. It's used in national or state elections in Australia, Ireland, the United Kingdom, Nauru. It's also used in some local elections in New Zealand, Canada, and as we pointed out, some locations in the United States. So where it works, people seem to be pleased with it. And apart from the historical examples of special interests who repealed it because they were afraid of the results, in the jurisdictions that are mentioned in Celeste's comment, ranked choice voting appears to be fairly stable. Now, Celeste, I'm wondering if you would like to say anything further regarding your thoughts on ranked choice voting and how it might be more effectively advanced in those states and localities in the U.S. which haven't adopted it yet.
Hi, Gennady. Yes, thank you. I absolutely think we need to expand the ranked choice voting. We've achieved that in some areas of the United States, and I see a lot of our allies and other democratic countries are utilizing the voting system as well. San Francisco, that was mentioned, we do have a ranked choice voting system, but it does not apply to all of the presidential election votes in San Francisco. So it is kind of limited in San Francisco which elections that we are offered those choices in the voting to do. But I absolutely think this is just critical for us. And if we have other states and cities and counties in the United States utilizing this form of voting, I think that should be a huge encouragement for those of us who would like to see a broader, fairer election process, and for smaller parties that, would allow a broader selection than just a strictly dual majority system here in the U.S. And I had mentioned before too, I guess it's not exactly a ranked choice voting system that they're using in Italy. However, I was really impressed by the elections that were done in Italy, and their new leaders actually came from a newer party, the Five Star Party. And that's a new party. Now they have multiple parties over there, so it was a much easier challenge for a newer party to gain the popularity with it being a multi-party system over there already. But I just see a lot of encouragement from seeing some of those results, and especially with the US that we're discussing. If we have it in place already in certain locations, we need to broaden that and we need to emphasize that so they can see it's already working in the US, and that we can get a broader appeal to the other locations in the US to adopt this fairer form of voting.
Yes. Thank you, Celeste. We appreciate those remarks. And also, we'd like to thank John H. for his super chat. He says his contribution will be greater when he makes his first billion. Well, we look forward to that, John. But we appreciate what we can get. And now we have one final comment that I would like to emphasize from Mike DeVerde, and then we are going to need to move toward concluding this session. So I'm going to ask the panelists for their concluding remarks, but in your concluding remarks, see if you can provide some commentary in regard to the question Mike asks. What does the panel think could have happened in historical spoiler cases like Jill Stein in 2016 for the Green Party, allegedly, or Ross Perot in 1992 for the Reform Party with ranked choice voting? He says he knows this is counterfactual, so he's inviting speculation. But also I'm inviting any of the panelists in the next 2.5 minutes to provide your concluding thoughts for our audience.
Man, I don't know. Ross Perot might have won.
Well, Ross Perot got 19% of the popular vote that year, and so he didn't win any states. So he didn't win any electoral votes. But a case can be made that he changed the outcome. It was Bush Sr. and Clinton were running. Did he take enough votes from Bush Sr. to swing the electoral votes in some states to Bill Clinton? Although he appealed to people from both parties, so it's hard to say.
Yes, indeed. It's difficult to say because with the spoiler situation, it's presupposed that a person would have voted for one of the major parties or the other had this third party candidate not been in place. And that's often not the case. So if I didn't have the option to vote for third parties, I would probably not vote for president at all, given my opinions of the two major political parties. But in any event, thank you to our entire panel for thought-provoking, informative discussion. Thank you to Kit, Lisa, Stoney, and Chris for sharing a wealth of resources and inspiration for those of us who wish to see ranked choice voting implemented on a nationwide basis in the United States. We have been making significant progress in the preceding few years, and I hope this can continue. And I would like to salute FairVote Washington for your good work. And also, I would like to invite our audience, both from our longtime viewers as well as our new viewers through KGRA Radio, to keep tuning in every Sunday at 1 p.m. U.S. Pacific time for these kinds of cross-disciplinary, wide-ranging, thought-provoking conversations. We covered a lot of ground today, and we aim to cover a lot of ground in each of our subsequent virtual Enlightenment salons. Kit says, thank you so much for inviting us. You're welcome, and thank you for joining us. And she recommends everyone to join your state's ranked choice voting group. Anybody who advocates ranked choice voting in your state deserves your support. And from all of us here at the U.S. Transhumanist Party, until next time, we hope that you live long and prosper.